Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Linode and FreshBooks. I'm John Voorhees, and today we have our third and final special guest during this Teach on the Beach extravaganza, and that's Merlin Mann. Hi, Merlin.
Hi, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Just sitting here getting some recording done while Federico's out lounging somewhere next to the Mediterranean. I don't know.
Yeah, that's typical.
I think I got the short end of the stick, but I'm glad to have you on the show. I wanted to.
Well, I'm happy to talk to you, but you can't see my iPhone screen. I don't share that with anybody.
Oh, all right. I heard. I like to share mine and shame myself publicly, which I did a pretty good job of last week.
Alex is the worst. She's so judgy.
Oh, you know what? I think she pulled her punches with me. She was actually very nice. She said I actually had some sort of thought behind what I was doing, which
that's very generous.
It is very generous. I'm not so sure she's right about that, but I appreciate the
Well, thanks for having me on. I got big Italian shoes to fill, but I'm very happy to be here and I love our topic.
So, Merlin, the reason I invited you today was to talk a little about tech at home and its place in your family. Because to me, this is like, I've got three boys and they're older. I mean, two are in college, one's just entering high school this year. And so I've been through kind of the full spectrum of this to some degree, at least with my older ones. And I think this is like an incredibly complicated topic. And it's also kind of a timely topic because we've got iOS 12 coming out in the fall with its new screen time features, which include features specifically for managing usage of, iOS devices and apps for your family. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's great, and I agree that it's complicated. And because I have not gotten to the stage that you're at age-wise. I have a 10-year-old daughter going into fifth grade, and I haven't gotten to where you've gotten to. So I feel like I have a lot to learn from you. And I'm prepared to throw a lot of my high-minded ideals out the window any day now.
All right. Well, before we get into any kind of specifics about what's coming in iOS and that sort of thing, I think it makes sense to just kind of frame the topic and talk a little bit about what we're talking about here. And this, to me, as a child of the 70s and 80s, this reminds me very much of when my parents would shut off the TV and say, "Stop watching that thing. You're going to rot your brain out."
My mom called it the idiot box. She would cut the plug off of it so I couldn't plug it in.
That must be a Midwestern thing because I had that too growing up in Michigan.
Oh my God, it's so Cincinnati. Such a Cincinnati thing to do. Our glorious 12-inch diagonal black and white TV that had a total of 5 channels.
Yes, simpler times, no doubt. But I think what we're dealing with now is kind of an extension of that because that was all about physically sitting down in front of a screen. And that's very much the debate that people are having today about screen time, which is either sitting in front of a computer or in front of some sort of slab of glass that is glowing in your face for long hours. But when I think about this, and maybe this was part of the dynamic back with television as well, but I feel like the topic really should be divided into a couple of different pieces. And one is the hardware side of it, which is that glowing box, and the other is the software / content side, which is what are you doing with that glowing screen? Because I feel like those things, when I talk to other parents, they get conflated a lot so that people set these hard limits on usage of devices for their kids, and I think that's appropriate at some level. And I'm where that line is drawn is different for different people, but I feel that's appropriate. But on the other hand, I think that there's like a qualitative aspect of this that needs to be explored in terms of what is your kid doing with this device? What do you think?
Oh gosh, I completely agree. I was really relieved when you mentioned that was your point of view on it, because I totally agree. I mean, where do you begin? I agree with you. So I was born in the mid 60s, and every generation has their boogeyman. In the 50s, it was comic books. At one time, it was other kinds of books, like should kids really be reading these provocative books about pirates or whatever it was. There's always a boogeyman that represents some difference in, as you say, software and hardware. But it could be the medium, but it could also be the content. It certainly could be both. But there's always this idea that there is this kind of a moral threat out there that has to be managed. Which I think can be very true. I don't want my kid just picking R-rated movies to watch all night. You can certainly see one very far end of that spectrum. At the other end, you've got a side of the spectrum that's maybe something closer to like a Waldorf approach. We have a friend whose kid is in Waldorf, and she's very discouraged from really using almost any kind of electronic device, even at my daughter's age. But I think there is definitely ground in between, and I think you're right on in terms of, what are you doing with those screens? But the only bracketing, I feel like my opening statement is just that I want to just highlight how much of the anxiety, concern, and fretfulness of parents may have some basis in our own fear and shame. Honestly, like with my daughter right now, I'm just getting pictures right this second of my daughter getting a haircut. She's like, why do I have to get my hair brushed before I go in to get my haircut, get all my hair chopped off? And we're like, well, make it easier for them to cut. And I chimed in. I was like, no, it's because we have to be seen taking care of you. If we are not seen taking care of you, you will bring shame and dishonor upon the family, and you're not allowed to do that. So you can't go out with dandruff on your shirt. You have to brush your hair. You have to brush your teeth. Yes, I want you to have teeth, but I also don't want to look bad. I think that is part of it, and I think that gets played out in the silliest way by young parents. Like, for example, we didn't let her watch TV until after she was 2 because all the doctors say you shouldn't do that. So we did that. But there's always this thing of like, okay, let the kid watch TV, but it's educational.
Right.
Well, is it really educational? Is Caillou really educational?
Caillou's just a little weird, really.
Caillou's the worst. It's worst. It's like a bespoke personal instruction in how to be professionally annoying. So anyway, just to get that rant out of the way, everything I do, I try to leaven. I try to have some self-consciousness of not passing my nonsense onto the kid or my own hang-ups. And so whenever it comes to stuff like this, I try to be sensible about taking the approach you're taking, which is to say, well, first of all, like, what is it I'm trying to accomplish here? Am I merely addressing a concern? Am I trying to do something proactive and prophylactic that will improve the child's life? And how much am I just doing something because I just feel like she's watched too much TV today and now she's cranky? So in all of those things, I think that takes a lot of not just self-awareness, but a changing and evolving self-awareness as you change and as your kids change. So that's where I start off kind of back on my heels, because I know I don't want to be fretful for its own sake. And on the other hand, I see how incredibly valuable some of this stuff is. I mean, there's all these things people write about kids learning to read so that they can learn more about Minecraft. You look at something like Harry Potter. You look at my kid with learning how to figure out a problem by searching on YouTube. Any of those things. So yeah, I agree that it's super complicated, but it's not simply complicated because the big bad world wants to eat your kid. It's also because we have our own baggage and hangups that we need to address in what problem we define and then how we try to solve it.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems too is that it's just easier to put hard limits on things and not kind of deal with the qualitative aspects of them. I mean, I get that. It's just simpler to say no more of whatever it is. But I think if you take some of the boogeymen out of it and talk about something that I think most parents would recognize as a good thing, like reading a book, it kind of sheds some light on this, because it's like, if my son was sitting in his room reading a book for 16 hours a day, at some point I'm going to tell him to go outside and play with his friends.
You want to see some balance.
Yeah, exactly. It's like for any kid, there's being well-rounded in various aspects of life, and you don't want any one thing dominating. So that, it kind of leads to this slippery slope type of argument sometimes, I think, where it's like, well, these things are bad because kids just want to endlessly play games on them. And I think there's a lot more to it than that. And a couple of examples. I mean, my oldest son, he taught himself iOS programming at a pretty young age. He was about the age of your daughter when he learned how to write iOS apps. And he spent a lot of time reading, programming books and working on the computer and building his first app. And at times, those were long hours, but I gave him a lot more leeway than I would if he was sitting in front of a computer playing Call of Duty, because it struck me as something, it turned out to be his passion. I mean, he's in college now as a CS major, and it was the kind of thing where I felt like he ought to have a little more leeway to explore that and figure out if that was going to be his thing, which it kind of turns out it is, which is great. On the other hand, I think, as you mentioned with Minecraft, my youngest son, he does play a lot of these games. I mean, he's playing things like Fortnite a lot, but he's also gotten into the side of this where he has started to create YouTube videos for himself and working with other people where they're these big clip montage type videos, and there's a skill there though that he's still learning, which is he's learned how to use all kinds of motion graphics and all these editing tools.
But he's on YouTube, and YouTube is such a sewer.
I know it is.
Does it just scare the crap out of you?
A little bit, although I trust my kids to do the right thing, and I keep a close enough eye on them that I don't have too many concerns. And I'm at the point now where I'm at number 3, who's entering high school. To some degree, I'm defeated, right? I mean, he's got 2 older brothers, and the youngest in that situation is always going to be exposed to a lot more stuff than any of the older ones, because you just can't help it. They've got older siblings in the house, and that's just kind of the way it works. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the things is that, especially when they were younger, we tried to keep all this tech and stuff kind of where we could see it. And now I know that's not always possible for all parents. Like if you have both parents working out of the house and that sort of thing, and your kid is home alone for some period of time, that's when, some of the tools maybe we'll talk about later can play a big role. But trying to keep it where we have our eye on it has worked pretty well for us. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. With Linode, you'll have access to a suite of powerful hosting options with prices starting at just $5 a month. And you'll be up and running with your own virtual server in the Linode cloud in under a minute. You really can't go wrong with saving time and money. It's a great combination. Linode has hundreds of thousands of customers who are all serviced by their friendly 24/7 support team. You can email them, call them, or even chat over IRC in the Linode community. They know how important it is for you to get the help you want. And they also have a suite of amazing guides and support documentation to give you a reference when you need it. Linode's intuitive control panel will allow you to deploy, boot, resize, snapshot, and clone your virtual servers in just a few clicks. And they feature 2-factor authentication to keep you safe. On top of that, Linode guarantees 99.9% uptime for server availability. Once your server's up, they keep it that way. Linode offers additional storage too. Block storage is now out of beta and available in Fremont and Newark. So what can you use Linode for? The answer is a ton of things, like hosting a large database, operating a VPN, running a mail server, running Docker containers, hosting a private Git server. The list just goes on and on. Oh, and guess what? Linode is hiring right now. So if that interests you, go over to linode.com/careers to learn more. Linode has fantastic pricing options too. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for only $5 per month, and they offer high memory plans starting with 16 gigabytes of RAM. As a listener of this show, if you sign up at linode.com/appstories, you'll not only be supporting the show, but you'll also get $20 towards any Linode plan. That's a great deal. I mean, on the 1 gigabyte of RAM plan, that's 4 free months. And with a 7-day money-back guarantee, there's nothing to lose. So go to linode.com/appstories right away to learn more, sign up, and take advantage of that $20 credit. Or use the promo code AppStories2018 at checkout. We'll put a link in the show notes too. Thanks again to Linode for supporting the show.
I continue, because I'm so personally broken inside, I remain in this skeptical to idealistic point of view because I'm trying, from my own self-awareness, I've learned to become self-aware that at a certain point or certain points in life, everybody gets panicky about how the world is changing. So when it's somebody that's older than you that's doing that, you look at them and say, well, obviously you're being hysterical. There's not, you think about the moral panics, again, stuff like Satanism in daycare centers, or, Procter & Gamble is, owned by the Moonies or whatever. There's all these kinds of crazy things that, because it's something you can't understand, it's not for you, you kind of naturally, reflexively reject it. So for example, somebody like maybe like you, certainly like me, I didn't grow up on computers. I got into computers in college, and then computers became my job, and making web pages became my job, and et cetera, et cetera. So that feels very familiar to me. And I feel like not only that, but I kind of understand at least the 1998 level threats posed by the internet, which means I am somewhat hysterical about worrying that she's going to see some kind of ritual killing or something. Right. That kind of thing certainly comes along. But, we've got a daughter and we've got a cat, and I try to remember to treat them differently. So like with our cat is really stupid. And so there's certain kinds of stuff you just keep away from the cat. There's certain times the cat has to go get groomed. So you put it in a little portable cage and you take it around. So I'm okay being, and in fact, some kinds of things, like, I don't know if you know the trick, but like to get a cat to stop doing something, you can like spray it with a water bottle. But it's key that the cat not think it's you that's doing it. It should seem like God is annoying it instead of you. Otherwise it just gets mad at you. Cats are the worst. But with a kid, I not only, I don't want to be that arbitrary, because part of it is I would like to think that she'll develop some agency. And if I give her the right kinds of direction, I will cause her, I don't want her to panic. I don't want her to freak out. I don't want her to become anxious, but like, I'm trying to find ways to give her agency. So for example, at times when everybody has times when they feel like their kid's watching too much TV, even if you're kind of monitoring it, one that we run into a lot is I'll walk into the room and I'll say, same phrase every time. Okay, last one. Let's wrap it up. Like, you're going to watch one more Steven Universe and then we're going to wrap it up. And of course I come in, she's playing Switch, she's listening to music, and Steven Universe continues to run. And I get a little frustrated because I say, remember, I said, that's the last one. Well, one example there is you can tell Netflix or whatever to stop playing the next video automatically. At one point, a couple of years ago, I adopted this strategy that I thought was very smart, which was setting the sleep timer on the TV. But it ended up feeling really arbitrary. Like, neither of us were happy about it. I mean, it works. What problem are you trying to solve? Well, if you want your child to watch less TV, don't have a TV in the house. If you have a TV in the house, then you have to have some kind of a healthy relationship. You see, I hope you see where I'm going with this.
Right.
It's just that alongside my own struggles with trying to stay even relatively modern, I want to stay focused on what I'm trying to do. One of the things I'm trying to do is get her to have some sense. I'm losing this battle. Getting her to understand a sense of time, a sense of how long it takes to do things, and an internal sense of like, well, maybe it is time for me to stop watching TV. I'm nowhere near that. I'm just not persuaded at this point that having things turn off automatically is the full solution.
Yeah.
If she were some kind of a juvie, some kind of like delinquent that was out there deliberately like trying to do something that is a known bad, I would have to consider that. But that's where I am right now. And so I'm trying different things that I'd love to talk about with you. I have not done that much with iOS. I've done stuff with our Eero. I will do stuff with host files and stuff like that. But that's my approach. Is I want to give her enough rope to build a bridge.
Yeah.
Supposed to hopefully not hang herself.
Yeah. It's hard because, part of the problem, I think, is that we know ourselves well enough that we have our own problems and hangups with technology, right? Whether it's someone who scrolls endlessly through Instagram or Facebook or something, or their timeline on Twitter, or binge watching whole series in one evening. The kids have even less restraint than we do.
The whole time we're pretending that she can't see us looking at our iOS devices all day. Finally, today I had to say to her, look, I know this sounds mental, but a lot of the times when I look like I'm quote unquote playing with my phone, I'm actually doing part of my dumb job. Like, I know it doesn't seem like that. And she totally rolled her eyes. Yeah. She thought that was the biggest sack of crap she'd ever heard. But this gets to another issue, just as long as we're getting through the baseline issues, which is that I feel like, I don't like that word hypocrisy. I think it's a way overused word. I think it's a way too extreme word. But rather than hypocrisy, let me put out the word inconsistency. If there's an inconsistency between what you occasionally demand angrily of somebody versus what you do 99% of the time, that's a problem. If your rules are not the kind of thing, and obviously you're a grown-up. If you're John Syracuse, you go out and say, hey, look, I'm a grown-up. I got different rules. I'm not to that stage, but I do feel like if there's a disconnect between the things that I expect of myself and the things that I expect of her, you can't, if I don't brush my teeth, why would she brush her teeth?
Right.
And so I'm not saying, I understand that there's your kids. You've got to have a different thing going on, but I would encourage people to look at how consistently, as in every time, they apply something they call a rule. Because if everybody's having a good day and everything's going fine, I'm usually just coasting along. It's when things aren't going well. It's when we're late. It's when I'm frustrated, when I'm tired, when she's cranky from watching TV for 9 hours or whatever. Not that long, but you take my point.
Right.
Do you find yourself bringing the hammer down out of anger and frustration? Or do you consistently press between the shoulder blades to say, this is a thing we do every day, no matter what? I think that is a failing of some of these hardware and software options, is people using it as a kind of cudgel because they're mad about how things are going. And I think just like your cat realizing that you're spraying it because you're a jerk, I think your kid starts to see that like you're not a centered person and that you will pull out the big guns when you get frustrated and angry, but that there's not a consistent thing in place. consistency is the hardest part of parenting in many, many ways.
Very much
and
so.
I think before you lay down the law, you need to ask yourself, what rule can I be consistent about, both hewing to and enforcing? And then you have this whole rich panoply, this array of wonderful tools for implementing whatever everybody understands the rules are. But if the rules are not equally applied and consistent with how you actually roll, you're pushing a stone.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this comes down to the underlying baseline issue of technology being really nothing more than a tool. And it gets demonized, I think, which conflates all of these issues, whether it's not understanding what the kids are up to, or what they're...
It's your lack of certainty and knowledge
right.
that causes you to become suspicious about stuff in some ways.
Exactly. And I'll tell you, I have the same exact problem now that my day job is writing on the internet. I am constantly, I'll be on the couch playing a game, and that's like, oh yeah, I got a review I got to write tomorrow.
I know. Well, I found out, I mean, this is not a bad thing, but over on the Relay Network, we do a member episode in August, and I hadn't known. I had just learned that they wanted that episode to go out the next day, the day after it was edited. It was no big deal. It took me like an hour and a half, but it's an hour and a half at like 7 p.m.
Right.
That's the nature of my job, and I happen to really like it. There are worse things to do in life than come up with a funny title for a podcast with John Siracusa. There are worse things in this world. But that's the kind of thing when you're working on your own, you are, whether you mean to or not, modeling a certain kind of slightly anarchic behavior. And like any knowledge worker, I'll put on my 43 folders hat. Like any knowledge worker, it is not clear what you do and whether you're good at it.
Right.
And so that just looks like you playing with your phone or typing on the computer at dinner time. So it sends a kind of strange message.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, I have my office down here in the basement, and I'll come up after being down here all day, and I was like, oh, I didn't get that much done today. I only worked like, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours.
All you do is type.
All I do is type. And it's like, well, yeah, I was downstairs for 9 hours, but half the time I was, scrolling Twitter or...
Yeah, Slack was down. Somebody didn't respond to my email. Like, somebody started like harassing me on Twitter. Like there's all these things that can really take you off your game.
Somebody's wrong on the internet and you have to deal with it. I mean,
can't go to sleep.
No, it happens all the time. So what do you think about social media? Has your daughter gotten into social media at all? I mean, my kids, not so much. I mean...
really?
Not a little bit.
That's super interesting to me. You hear the stat about how the kids are not signing up for Facebook anymore, but like not like WhatsApp or Instagram. They're not on it.
Yeah. Well, my 2 oldest are on Facebook mainly for school related stuff because it's still the place where I guess a lot of students go for like study groups and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But for the most part, other than that, that Facebook's for old people, they tell me. And and Instagram now I'm being told is for old people, which, makes sense, I guess. I don't know. But I guess my youngest does use Snapchat a fair amount still. That's still a thing. But it's that, and then it's for him though, because he is into this group of friends who likes to play a couple hours of video games a lot of days. They just chat back and forth through whatever it is, when they're playing the game. So that
sure.
I
or
think
like
that,
Discord or something.
Yeah,
like that.
it's usually Discord, I think, and that I think fulfills that for him most of the time because it's How about you?
No. I preemptively, once we knew her name, I preemptively grabbed her a bunch of names in various places. Gmail, me.com, stuff like that.
Oh, I did the same thing. That's what we do, Merlin.
she has like 3 domain names that she can use someday. But no, not so much. I would say the closest, this is going to sound like a strange answer or perhaps a too obvious answer. I think the closest thing to what could become a social media thing for her in some ways is YouTube. I remember first hearing Gruber talk about this, hearing Siracusa talk about this funny phenomenon of multiple media devices. And I was like, and Gruber would say like, oh, his son would like watch a YouTube video while listening to music, while playing a video game, while like a TV show was streaming in the background.
Right.
And I was like, sure, I would have done it when I was 11. That sounds really fun. But she so does that. She's playing Zelda on the Switch every possible second of the day. This is an issue. While she's got like 5-minute life hacks playing on the iPad, while again, something like Steven Universe is playing, which does give me, and especially my wife, a little bit of an itch. Like,
yeah,
is this wholesome to do a lot? But no, the reason I say that is that like, she's very conversant in, like I say, she knows how to use Google. She knows how to use YouTube. She's good at getting to the stuff that she wants, and then YouTube just keeps, feeding her more of it. But no, not yet. Not yet. I haven't. She's not even that interested. So we gave her my old iPhone 6S and got her hooked up with LTE because I think it's time.
Yep.
I want to be able to stalk her on Find My Friends and know where she is. And I want her to be able to, she's getting more independent. She's going more places on her own or at home by herself. And I want her to be able to communicate with us. But gosh darn, if she does not just ignore all of the texts my wife and I send her, and it drives us bananas.
Oh, yeah.
We'll want to like check in with her. And she's like, no, I don't check texts. And then I see there's like a big red 23 on the icon. I'm like, how are you not? This is why we gave you the thing.
Yeah.
So she's not even into that. I've tried to get her to like text a little bit with her friends. I thought that would be a gentle inroad where we know the parents, we know the kid, we know that our kid's good, their kid's good. Like I thought that would be a gentle inroad. She's she's just not into it. The worst thing she'll do is she'll trash talk in her, like, not in Scratch, but in Google Docs. She'll trash talk with her friends about homework. That's about it.
That's great. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by FreshBooks. To all the freelancers out there, you know how important it is to make smart decisions about your business. Our friends at FreshBooks can save you up to 192 hours with their cloud accounting software for freelancers that's ridiculously easy to use. Here's how they do it. By simplifying tasks like invoicing, tracking expenses, and getting paid online, FreshBooks has dramatically reduced the time it takes for over 10 million people to deal with their paperwork. I want to talk to you a little bit about invoicing today. Yeah, I know it's a chore, but here's the thing. Invoicing is essential. If you don't invoice, you don't get paid. And if you don't get paid, you don't have a business. That's why you want to use FreshBooks. It takes the pain and guesswork out of invoicing. An invoice is super simple to set up and send to a client. But best of all, you can actually tell if it's been seen. If time passes and your invoice hasn't been opened, maybe it got lost in the shuffle and you should follow up. The other nice thing related to invoicing is that FreshBooks can do follow-up for you. You send the invoice, and FreshBooks can send an automatic reminder if you don't get paid on time. It eliminates the need to set reminders for yourself and to set aside time to chase late payments so you can get back to the work at hand. So, if you're listening to this and aren't using FreshBooks yet, now is the time to try it. FreshBooks is offering an unrestricted 30-day free trial for listeners of this show. No credit card is required. All you have to do is go to freshbooks.com/appstories and enter App Stories in the How Did You Hear Us section. That's freshbooks.com/appstories and enter App Stories in the How Did You Hear About Us section. We'll include a link in the show notes. Thanks so much to FreshBooks for supporting the show. Here's a Find My Friends story. And sometimes you have to kind of regulate the parents too, because we had yes, because we had Find My Friends on, and my wife got into the habit of checking up on my son at college on Friday night to see if he was going out and having a good time with his friends. And I was like, you shouldn't do that. I mean,
that's edgy. That's a little edgy.
Yeah, it's a little much. So I just told them both. I said, you ought to shut that off because your mom's stalking you. And they did, and she wasn't too happy about it, but she learned her lesson.
I've come to rely on it. Like I talked about this on a recent Reconcilable Differences with Syracuse, but my wife is a runner. She's does marathons. She's prepping for her next marathon and running, 17 miles on a Sunday afternoon in Marin County. And she'll just go off the map. And I get so panicky. I either think like she's in a ditch or she's left me. And I'm like, I get so panicky because I'm so used to that being there. Like I get a bloop when she leaves work. And again, with Find My Friends, I'm glad that's real locked down to just the three of us stalking each other. I will very rarely sometimes use that, like I'm on the way to dinner, like you can follow me here, that kind of thing. But it is funny how you start to depend on that, or how you start to depend on how often somebody usually responds to a text.
Right. No,
and then
absolutely.
you get real. I get real anxious about that and needy.
Yeah, and I've trained everybody to expect an immediate response because I'm almost always sitting here in front of my Mac, and so if my wife texts me while she's at work, I usually respond. But and
if you don't, they assume there's a gas leak and you died typing.
God forbid I went somewhere for 5 minutes and my phone was on Do Not Disturb or something. But one of the things, so with iOS 12, there are these screen time limits coming, and as a parent, you can apply those to kids. And I've been testing them out because I'm going to write about it for Mac Stories, and I set up by way of an aside, I set up a fake child because
you mentioned this, and I'm so curious to hear about this. You made a fake 13-year-old.
Well, unfortunately, I made a fake 1 month old. I was going through the settings quickly and set the date like the same day that I was setting it up, which is not good because it turns out you cannot remove a child from an under 13-year-old child from an account. So I'm stuck
There's a dirty little secret out there that nobody talks about, which is everybody lies about their kid's age so they can have their own account on things.
I know. So
I can't believe they even let you do that.
now I have a fake child that I won't be able to get rid of for 13 years. Be interested to see what iOS is like by then.
Oh God, that's so funny.
Yes. But yes, I set up a fake child because I knew that screen time was a little buggy under iOS 12, and God forbid that I screw up my kids' iCloud account somehow and they can't do whatever they want to do, because none of them have restrictions on them now. And I really don't see doing that once these things are implemented, mainly because they're older. I mean, I probably would have considered these if my kids were still in elementary school or even middle school. But with my youngest going into high school and kind of going through the training we've been able to give him over the last several years, I don't really feel like I need these. But it is set up in a way that is very similar to what we've been talking about, in the sense that on the one hand, you've got downtime, which is a way to basically just immobilize the phone for a set period of time. Unfortunately, it's like one period of time. It's only like, you can set it for bedtime till the morning. You can't say, oh, I want it also off for this hour or two.
Apple's bad about that. They do the same thing in a bunch of HomeKit things where it's
exactly.
Now I want multiple things. I don't want just a single range.
Yeah, like when they're supposed to be doing their homework, right? Maybe from the first half hour, they're home after school for a couple of hours until dinner time, and then they can have it on again for a few hours and off again. But be it as it may, that's how it works. And then they've got a bunch of different content type restrictions.
Super interesting. And I don't think you get to pick your own.
No, you've got two things. You've got categories, which is based on, I think, how the developers categorize their apps when they submit them to the App Store. Things like social, networking, games, educational, all sorts of things like that. Then you also, it's a little bit backwards how you get into it, but you can get to individual apps and put limits on particular apps. It's usually the easiest way to get into it is when you go to that screen time report that you get. It'll list your most used apps, and you can go in, tap those, and set limits for each of those. And those are, like a timed limit or after which the app doesn't work anymore.
Yes. I think it's super interesting. I hate to admit this, I've been on since the first developer beta.
I was on before I left San Jose.
Well, and you of course you sound like such a jerk saying, "Oh, don't do it. I do this because it's my work or whatever." No, the truth is I want the cool stuff. Like I want the good things.
So do I.
So first I put it on my iPad, then I put it on my phone, and with the exception of the little blip in the latest one, which got fixed, it's been a champ. So yeah, and with the screen time, it seems to kind of reset every couple versions. You got to remember to turn it back on.
Right.
It has only recently successfully been doing the multi-device thing, but I just want to say, like, before I get to any limitations that I set for myself or others, I just think getting that view into usage is fascinating.
Yes.
I was telling my wife about, I'm sure you're familiar with Moment. You've probably written about it. How I used to use Moment and what a hack it was to take screen grabs of your battery time that some AI would then turn into usage. And I imagine it's going to be tough on people like, any of those time tracking, rescue time type apps, because clearly this is something they're going to put in lots of places. But it is very informative to know. The single most interesting one to me, I'm interested in seeing like what websites they go to and stuff. I used to love that in rescue time. The single most interesting one for me, you can probably guess, is pickups.
Oh yeah.
I'm really surprised at how many times I pick up an iOS device. That's been amazing. But I'm very intrigued by it. There's a little bit of a tangent, but I don't know. You don't know if you got an Eero. We've got an Eero system that they gave us. This is a mesh Wi-Fi system that also comes with an improbably excellent app for iOS. So just for your listeners who don't know, it's kind of costly, but it's really, really good. This whole beacon system.
Yep.
I've got 4 of these beacons in my 1,000 square foot flat just because I want one in the garage. I want it everywhere. And it really, really, really works.
Yeah,
with a fast Comcast wired connection, it really, really works. But the app is gold. The app lets you do stuff like, at a basic level, it lets you identify and name the various devices that are on your Wi-Fi system. I know you know this, but you can identify those things. You can put emojis in there. If you see something on your network you don't recognize, you can block it. That's all really cool. Next level, as part of the basic package that comes with it, you also have something called profiles. Now, have you ever explored profiles?
No, I haven't. I actually just set up a neural network about a month ago, and I haven't. I do like the app a lot, but I haven't gone into the profiles yet.
It does a speed test every day. It's really cool.
Yep.
But one thing you've always been able to do is create a profile. And a profile is where you go in. And now, if you're a nerd like me, we have 34 devices on our Wi-Fi. And they're all named. They all have an emoji. It's got the name of the person and the device. Ellie's iPad, Merlin's iPhone 10. They've all got names. I know who each person is. And with profiles, you go in and say, okay, here's a person named John. And John uses this device, and this device. So you have the ability at the network level with just the basic freebie version of this. You have the ability to go in and set things like limitations, which is real handy. Now, this new thing, this is not an ad, but they have a thing called Eero Plus, which they were kind enough to give me a free version of. Eero Plus lets you, on top of that, add checks for malware, basic content filtering. So I've been experimenting with that with my kid and with me. Now, the interesting thing is I set hers up to filter out illegal and gambling stuff, adult stuff. I turn on all the shields for her, and I have not heard a word about it. So that seems like a good sign.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
And I tried it for myself just to see what it's like. Because I've used stuff like OpenDNS before, where you can go in and OpenDNS is basically a DNS that you go in and say, I want this different DNS system from my stupid Comcast one that breaks all the time. And I want to be able to control what kinds of sites are seen, et cetera. So that's what I've been experimenting with. And it seems to kind of work. I'm still able, it's so funny to be sitting there and doing searches for bad things in Google just to see if it'll let me. And I don't think it's 100%, but I'm very intrigued by the idea of that network level control. And what you can do with that. So that's what I've done. I have not set her up on this, but I do have a couple anecdotes actually related to the podcast that I'm recording with you right now that I thought were very intriguing.
What's that?
Yeah, just for what it's worth. Well, two anecdotes. One anecdote is last night I was sitting there with my printed out copy of the things he had written and writing on it with a pencil because I'm 51. And she's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Believe it or not, this is work." And I said, "I'm going on the show." And I told her what we're going to talk about. And I assured her I would try not to embarrass her. But I also said, "Yeah, we're going to talk about this thing." And I showed her on my phone. It's called Screen Time on the beta. And she thought it was super interesting. So I went in, I logged in and got her on the public beta. Now her iPad is on Screen Time and she's very intrigued. I told my wife about it this morning. She's over the moon. My wife is dying for this solution. She's super into limitations. She really likes the idea of like, don't let me look at Twitter anymore. She responds very well, more than my daughter and me. She responds very well to that. And she's all in. She wants to be on the beta when she gets home today. She's very into it.
That's interesting.
My daughter is intrigued by it. I think she's intrigued by the data and the idea of seeing what she's done. We'll see. I could explain to her how you can shut things off. As of this morning, she's not into that, but my wife is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just seeing the data about what I am a self-quantification. Like, I can't even tell you like how much stuff I track about myself just because it interests me.
Yeah, I do the same. It's a real eye-opener, too, especially Screen Time. I mean, you really learn things about yourself that you didn't know before.
You totally do. But I don't use Rescue Time anymore. But at a time when I was doing a lot of writing, I would use Rescue Time because it would shame me into spending less time on a specific website, for example. But I'm still super interested, whether it's my weight, my sleep, my steps, any of that stuff. I track it all. And I just feed that into stuff like Gyroscope and Exist.io, not because of what it does today, but who knows what it'll do next year. And I think being able to visualize how you conduct yourself is very informative and can be very inspiring. It can be depressing. But I do feel like as long as that stuff stays mostly private, and if it doesn't, what's the worst thing? You know, I slept not that great last night. But the truth is, though, I think seeing that data tells us, it gives us a portrait of ourselves that's not self-reported. It's not an autobiography.
Right.
It's somebody from the New York Times writing a biography.
Yes.
You find out who you are. So again, let it begin with me. Let me see how I'm using this. But anyway, I'm very intrigued by Screen Time. And I think it's because it's something I guess you mentioned here. So now that she is on the beta and now that she is added as my child in the family thing, I can go in and now see that. So I guess I'll check in on that. It makes me feel a little creepy. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. Do you think it's going to catch on with people?
I think so. I think it should catch on, and I think it'll catch on if it does the way it caught on with you, which is you tried it first and then you showed it to other people in your family, right? Because I think that once you see the kind of data that it can collect and what that what that's showing you, it's really, it does become intriguing. I mean, you realize
Yes.
that, okay, I pick up my phone every 6 minutes, every day of the week, 7 days a
Yeah.
week, 365 days a year. That's a
For
lot.
your work.
Yeah, for my work. Yeah, always for the work, Merlin. Yes.
But it's also, I've said this before, and I know I will eventually regret saying it, and I know I eventually will disagree with it, but I kind of like when my kid's cagey. I like it when she figures out how to do stuff and get around stuff, because she's becoming more independent as a person, as
Right.
long as she's not juggling knives or something. But if she figures out a way to snatch some candy and have me not notice it, that's good. If I notice she snatched the candy, it's not as successful. I don't want her to become a liar, but I also admire, it's like a Kobayashi Maru thing. I admire somebody who figures out how the system works.
Right.
But to go straight back to that, the combination of shame and fear and eating your own parental dog food, I do believe if you think this stuff is a solution to something, you must run it on yourself, because you want to see how it works, how you can get around it,
Yep.
what you are actually accomplishing. Because let's go back to first principles, Clarice. If I'm trying to solve a specific problem using a tool, I need to see if that problem is getting solved by use of that tool, if it's getting in the way, if it's easy to contravene. So if you really do care about this stuff, you must do it yourself just to see what it's like.
Yeah, and the fact that kids can get around this stuff is a reason why the limits that you put on should be reasonable limits, because I know, for instance, that my youngest son was using Instagram DMs as a form of, social network, which was really weird to me, but it was something that wasn't blocked by the school. And
oh, that's so
right,
interesting.
and the parents didn't know about it, and the more and then I found something. I was reading some article somewhere online, and I guess it was kind of a thing for tweens for a while. And I mean, that
Foldering?
yeah,
You know about foldering? That's what Paul Manafort was doing. Do you know about this?
no, what?
Foldering. So this is apparently something that started with the youths, and now it's something Paul Manafort was doing at one point, which is you go into Gmail
Yeah,
and you save an email as a draft, and then somebody else has access to that account and could go in and read the draft and respond. It's kind of like Google Docs-ish
sure.
functionality, but just inside of Gmail.
Okay.
And apparently that's something the youths are doing.
All right.
I love my kids' school. I love my kids' school, and they try so hard, but I don't trust them as far as I could throw them. One time I logged into there just to see what it was like and to see if she could do it. Again, dog fooding. I logged into their guest network, and of course it's totally unprotected,
Right.
no password, and immediately threw a certificate error. And I'm like, oh, God, is anybody keeping an eye on this? It's probably no big deal,
Yeah.
And if you run a VPN, it gets very confused. What's a VPN?
Yeah.
Well, everybody should know what a VPN is.
I think
but if you're throwing certificate errors on your public guest Wi-Fi at the school, I know that's got to be number 7,000 on the list of priorities, but you really need to ride herd on this, because I guess the theme that'll run through all of what we're saying here is understand what you're trying to accomplish, understand what success or failure looks like, and then be prepared to do your own due diligence and maintenance on this stuff. Like Bruce Schneier says, it's a process, not a product. And I think that's true with all of this stuff. You've got to do it yourself, but have a really well-defined idea about what the problem is and what success looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so as well. I've using the tools yourself and getting a basic understanding of what's going on goes an awful long way in figuring out what you're going to do with these kinds of issues. Merlin, I think that's probably a good place to stop for today.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry we didn't talk more about specific apps, but it's this is what you get when you talk to me, is just that thinking about how we're going to implement what we're trying to do with these tools becomes way more important than what the actual tool is.
Right.
Right? There's tools for doing everything, but if you don't understand how the tools work and you don't understand why you're using them, you should not be surprised that you're not getting the results that you expected. And there's so often we want to outsource these elements to other people, to other authority figures, to all these other people. And I don't know, man, there's ample reasons to acquaint yourself with this stuff and to reacquaint yourself with what your goals are. Share that with your kid, over communicate those things, and then have a way to talk about why or how it's not working.
Absolutely. So Merlin, where can people find you online these days?
Oh, you don't need to find me.
No?
You can go to merlinmann.com, but that's plenty good. I'm out there.
You
I
got
do
your
podcasts.
shows, you got your podcast.
If you like a lot of potty talk, you can listen to Do by Friday at dobyfriday.com with the screen critic Alex Cox and Max Temkin. That's fun. If you like the old school productivity stuff we do, sometimes you could listen to the Back to Work program on 5x5. But all the great shows.
All the great shows. All right. Well, thanks again for filling in for Federico, Merlin. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, John.
All right. Thanks. And thanks to our sponsors this week, Linode and FreshBooks, for making this episode possible. And you can always find me writing over at macstories.net. Bye, Merlin.
Bye.